Good evening. Shall I start?
Welcome.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay. Okay.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our webinar this evening, hosted by the Association of Presbyterian Church Educators and Flyaway Books. We are really excited to have you all join us this evening. Just before we get started, we have a little bit of a couple logistics. At the end of the presentation, there will be a time for questions and answers. You should see a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen that you can go ahead and use to ask questions. And if you don't, or if you have trouble finding that, go ahead and post your questions in the chat. We will go ahead and check both of those for questions for you. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Julia Boyce to you all, who is our current president of the Association of Presbyterian Church Educators. So welcome, Julia.
Hi. Welcome to all of you. The Association of Presbyterian Church Educators is an organization that's made up of not only Presbyterians, but we have several other partner denominations, including the Presbyterian Church in Canada, the Reformed Church of America, the Moravians, many, the Christian Reformed Church. It's a wonderful organization that supports lots of educators and ministers and pastors and volunteers in the field of Christian education and faith formation. And we are thrilled to offer yet another very high quality webinar and to welcome Dr. Michael W. Waters. Turns out Michael and I are both in Dallas, which is kind of cool. Michael is the founder and lead pastor of the Abundant Life Methodist AME Church, African Methodist Episcopal Church here in Dallas. He's a pastor, professor, author, activist, and social commentator. I'm just looking at all these lists of wonderful, some of my most favorite shows that you've been on, and you've been on NPR and MSNBC and all kinds of things. And someday I'll ask you what John Oliver's like. I think he's got to be a hoot. But we're here today to hear about your latest book, Michael, For Beautiful Black Boys Who Believe in a Better World. And we are so thrilled, and we feel very blessed to be with you tonight. So please, everyone, join me in welcoming Michael Waters, Reverend Michael Waters. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone. It really is a delight to be here with you, Jamie, Julia. Thank you for holding this space with me, and for all of you who are present tonight. I am delighted. Again, my name is Michael Waters, and I am the author of this book, which comes out in a little less than 2 weeks, For Beautiful Black Boys Who Believe in a Better World. And it's going to be my great honor to read through this book with you tonight, and then to offer a presentation following the reading, and then hopefully to engage in some vigorous conversation through your questions and my attempt at answers. This is a book that is very dear to my heart, given the fact that it was influenced by our family's real life experience over the last several years, and inspired by my own beautiful black boy named Jeremiah. Interestingly enough, my wife and I are currently expecting our fourth child, who will also be a son. So we'll have a son as the oldest and youngest, and then two beautiful young girls in between. And so again, this is a book that has been very meaningful to our family, a part of our journey, and I'm happy to share it with you tonight. So without any further ado, For Beautiful Black Boys Who Believe in a Better World, I'm the author, and Keisha Morris is the illustrator. May I grow locks? Asked Jeremiah. Sure, said his father. You still need to comb your hair every day until it gets long enough, said Mom. I promise I will, said Jeremiah. I can't wait to see my new locks. Maybe next week. His parents chuckled. It will take longer than that, said Dad. But just wait and believe. One day, it will happen. A few days later, Jeremiah saw a picture on his dad's computer. "Who's that?" he asked. "What did he do?" "That's Trayvon Martin," said Dad. "He was a young man walking home from the store. He didn't do anything. Still, someone hurt him, and he died." Dad shook his head. "It doesn't make sense." Jeremiah agreed, but he didn't want to talk anymore. One day, much later, Jeremiah asked, "Dad, who is that on TV? Why is he lying in the middle of the street?" "That's Michael Brown," said Dad. "He was 18 years old and on his way to college. He was hurt very badly, and he died." A new image appeared on the screen. Many people say he had his hands raised when he was shot. Those people on TV are marching to remind us. Jeremiah didn't understand. Why would someone shoot someone who just has his hands in the air? "It doesn't make sense," Dad said. "None at all." But Jeremiah didn't want to talk anymore. "Did you hear that?" Jeremiah asked one evening. "It sounded like gunshots." "I heard it," Dad said. "I'm going to see what's going on." "Oh, no, you aren't," said Mom. "Call 911 and stay with us." Mom and Dad guided Jeremiah and his sisters, Hope and Liberty, away from the windows and into the hallway. "Why are they shooting?" asked Jeremiah. "I don't know, son," said Mom, "but you're safe in here." Jeremiah didn't want to talk anymore. The family stayed in the hallway for a long time, and he and his sisters drifted off to sleep in their parents' arms. "We will never forget," Jeremiah read the words from his dad's newspaper one morning. "Forget what?" "These people were at Bible study at Mother Emanuel AME Church in South Carolina," Dad answered. "A young man came in and studied with them. But then he started shooting. The people who died are called the Charleston Nine. AME, just like our church. But why would anyone want to do that at church?" asked Jeremiah. "Why did he shoot them?" "Because of the color of their skin," said Dad. "Because they were black? That doesn't make any sense," said Jeremiah. "No, it doesn't make any sense at all," said Dad. But Jeremiah didn't want to talk anymore. "Where were you?" Jeremiah said when Dad came home after a long day away. "I was worried." "I'm sorry, son," said Dad. "I was invited to speak at the rally and march for the two men killed by police officers this week, Alton Sterling and Philando Castile. But afterwards, there were gunshots. It took a while to make sure everyone was okay." "Oh no," exclaimed Jeremiah. "I'm glad you're okay too." "So am I," said Dad as he squeezed Jeremiah in his arms. "So am I." "Dad, what are all those blue ribbons for?" said Jeremiah as the church drove to church one Sunday. "It looks like they're everywhere. Remember when Mom and I were downtown and someone started shooting? 5 Dallas police officers died that day," said Dad. "It's very sad. The blue ribbons honor them." Jeremiah watched the endless blue ribbons passing by. He didn't want to talk anymore. Dad, what is this vigil for? Said Jeremiah one afternoon. What's a vigil? Asked Hope. Yeah, what's a vigil? Said Liberty. It's when people gather to remember someone who has died tragically, Mom told them. Daddy is speaking here tonight. Who died now? Asked Jeremiah in a frustrated huff. What happened? A young man named Jordan Edwards, said Dad. He was 15 years old and riding in a car when he was shot and killed by a police officer. That makes no sense at all, said Jeremiah. You're right, son, said Dad. You're right. But Jeremiah didn't want to talk anymore. In the car on the way home from the vigil, Jeremiah thought about all that he had seen and heard. He imagined Jordan, the Dallas police officers, Philando, Alton, the Charleston Nine, Michael, Trevon, and others with names he didn't know. Later that night, Jeremiah came into his parents' room. Mom, Dad, I'm ready to talk. Okay, son, said Dad, we're listening. Jeremiah took a deep breath. I'm tired of people hurting each other. I'm tired of people shooting each other. I'm tired of people killing each other. I'm tired of people hating each other just because they are different or because of the color of their skin. You know what, said Dad? We're tired of all that too. Is there anything we can do about it? Asked Jeremiah. We're trying to, said Mom. And I believe one day things will change. That's why we vote, said Dad. That's why we march in the streets, said Mom. That's why we pray, said Dad. That's why we organize people in our community, said Mom. That's why we speak out against injustice, said Dad. That's why we give money to important causes, said Mom. That's why we write books and articles, give lectures and interviews, said Dad. That's why we love those around us, said Mom. Jeremiah, every day there are people working to make this world a better place for you and your sisters and many others. And we are working with them, said Dad. When we look at you and your sisters and all your friends, we have great hope for the future. We believe that your generation can work to change the world too. Jeremiah thought about that. It's like my hair. You told me my locks would take a long time. I just had to wait and believe, and with a little help, it happened. His parents smiled. Yes, it happened. I know I can't vote yet, but I will, said Jeremiah. If you let me, I can march. I already pray, and I'll keep praying. I can give some of my birthday money to someone who needs it. And when I see something wrong, or if I see someone hurt or bully someone else, I can speak up and get help. I can change the world. Yes, you will, son, said Dad. We know you will, son, said Mom. Jeremiah lifted his head, his long locks dangling, and proclaimed, yes, we will. for beautiful Black boys who believe in a better world. Let me also share at this time that in the back of the book and online, you will find an activity and discussion guide written by staff members of the Muhammad Ali Center in Louisville, Kentucky. One of my great honors is that Lonnie Ali, the widow of Muhammad Ali, was able to read a very early manuscript of the book and thought it not robbery to add the name of her husband and the support of that center towards this cause. And so again, in the back of the book, you'll find a discussion guide to prepare for the conversation with young people, to establish a safe space for that conversation, some hints about speaking about race in the classroom, as well as speaking about violence in the classroom, exploring change making, and discussing this book at home. These are just the items included in the book, but there is an extended guide, even beyond what you see here, that also can be utilized to share this book with others. I also have an author's note that speaks a little bit more about the inspiration of the book and why I think it's important to share in these conversations with young people. Again, I've been delighted at the reception of the book so far. But before we get into that, I have a presentation that I want to share with you, and then definitely want to leave room and time open for any questions or comments that you might have. I recently contributed a chapter to another book, How to Have Hard Conversations with Children is the nature and theme of the book. And my chapter in particular was about speaking to children about racial discrimination. And so I want to share a bit concerning that book with you now, or at least the chapter with you, in ways I think that can inspire this conversation. I've been honored to have this conversation recently with a number of schools and school districts, particularly as they prepare for this upcoming school year, our current school year. There's so much that has happened in the news. We've had multiple pandemics, the pandemic of the coronavirus, but we've really seen the pandemic of racial violence and police brutality continue to unfold at this time. And so many young people have questions all over the country. Matter of fact, it's for that purpose that we actually released the study guide, the discussion guide, the activity guide, and created also a coloring sheet, which you'll find online at Flyaway Books. We released that early because so many persons were reaching out to us asking for resources. But now with the book coming out in just a couple of weeks, you'll have the book and the resource together to engage in this conversation. So again, I've had conversations with schools locally here in Dallas, as well as did a conversation recently with an organization in Queens, New York. Persons all over the country are seeking to have faithful conversations with young people around what they are observing, what they are experiencing at this time, but also to empower them to be a part of the change making that is necessary in our world. So I'm going to share my screen with you now. Okay, I'll need your assistance. It's saying that my screen sharing is not allowed. So if you can allow me that opportunity, let's see, maybe I'm there now. I am. Okay, that was quick. Thank you so much. All right, and if you allow me just one more moment so I can pull down my video panel. Okay, excellent. And hopefully you can see the screen before you. All right. And so I want to talk about why we care, engaging kids about racial discrimination. I did have the honor of sharing a bit of this a couple of years ago as you met in Galveston for your annual event. And I'm not sure if any of you who are on with us tonight were a part of that presentation, but want to talk a little bit about that presentation and how I've expanded the work since then. So again, why we care, engaging kids about racial discrimination. Concerning the book so far, and I'm very honored by the reception that it has received. In the current edition of Essence Magazine, some of you may be familiar with this book. It's a national magazine largely for women, particularly for Black women being highlighted within this periodical. They have an article that just came out this month listing the 6 must-read books for children and teens for this that talk about race in America. And I'm very honored that For Beautiful Black Boys was included amongst the books that are being recommended by this publication. Also, former presidential candidate and Congressman Beto O'Rourke, very grateful for his endorsement, calling it one of the most important and timely books of the year. And then recently also Publishers Weekly that believed this book to be a starting point for facilitating discussions about racism and violence against Black people, which is really the intention, to create space and provide an opportunity for very vigorous and necessary conversation with our young people. A few more resources that I've contributed to recently and have upcoming, I want to share with you, should you be interested. These are primarily adult nonfiction books, but wanted you to be aware of them. I wrote the foreword to a wonderful book entitled Good White Racist, also published by WJK Press, Confronting Your Role in Racial Injustice. Some of you may be familiar with this book by Carrie Connolly. I already referenced When Kids Ask Hard Questions, Faith-Filled Responses for Tough Topics, in which you'll find my chapter on racial discrimination. My first book, Freestyle, Reflections on Faith, Family, Justice, and Pop Culture, which won 3 national awards, was Invitation to Discuss Race and Other Issues of Justice in America. Stakes is High, Race, Faith, and Hope for America. That book, very honored to have won the National Wilbur Award in Nonfiction in 2018, may be of interest to you. I wrote the foreword to another book, For Such a Time as This, Hope and Forgiveness After the Charleston Massacre, by the Reverend Sharon Risher. That book was featured on the Today Show, as well as MSNBC Live with Craig Melvin. I think it's a very important book. Sharon Risher lost her mother, cousins, and friends in the attack on Mother Emanuel AME Church. And recently, a documentary based on her work and on this book won a film festival. So that might be of interest to you. Preaching as Resistance, Voices of Hope, Justice, and Solidarity. I have a sermon contributed to that volume. And then coming this January, I have a new adult nonfiction book entitled Something in the Water, a 21st Century Civil Rights Odyssey, which attempts to pick up where Stakes is High left off, to further and even more deeply explore the role of race, racism, and white supremacy within our country. So great James Baldwin, 20th century public intellectual, novelist, just a giant of a man, presented or was a part of a significant debate in Cambridge in 1965. And as a part of that debate, he shared these very powerful words I want to share with you now. He says, "You're now 30, and nothing you have done has helped you escape the trap. But what is worse than that is that nothing you have done, and as far as you can tell, nothing you can do, will save your son or your daughter from meeting the same disaster and not impossibly coming to the same end." These harrowing words were shared to speak to the experience of Black parents in particular in America. He locates the time around the age of 30 where you come to the awareness that you are powerless to protect your children from experiencing racial discrimination. There's nothing that you can do to keep them from having that experience. So the question is, then what should we do? Not just as Black parents, but as parents in general and as persons who are trusted adults working with children, what should we do to help prepare them for the life that is before them? Obviously, we must become anti-racist. We must work to pull down those structures in our own time with our own energies and resources. But we also have a responsibility, I want to suggest, to prepare them for what they would face and to strengthen them for the contributions that they can make to justice. So again, the great words of James Baldwin are piercing, but I think they give us our marching orders that while we are aware of the fact that there's nothing we can do to completely shield young people from experiencing racial discrimination, there are things that we can do to prepare them for the journey ahead. So in terms of youth and racism, Black children represent about 18% of children in preschool programs and schools. They make up almost half of the preschoolers who are suspended. A very important data point concerning how young people are disciplined with the level of disparity based upon their hue, based upon their pigmentation. Quite frequently, for the very same infraction, if you will, or perceived infraction, Black children, even in preschool, are treated much more harshly than other young people. Also dealing with race and youth, Latino children frequently have their nationality questioned by their peers. They are told that people who lack documentation have little to no worth. Imagine what it might feel like to be a young Latino child in America today. Fearful, as I've heard some of the children testify from their own mouths. Before our COVID experience sent a lot of persons to their home, fearful of returning home from school with their parents nowhere to be found. Fearful of the images that they see of persons who look like them, children who are like them, who are locked in cages. Fearful of the responses and the othering that comes within our society, where people say if you don't have documentation, you don't have worth, and could be speaking about dear family members, or where there is a fight, even as a young person, to prove, you know what, I too am an American. I too am an American. This is something that impacts Latino youth as well. Extending the conversation for youth and racism, according to the American Psychological Association, Black boys as young as 10 may not be viewed in the same light of childhood innocence as their white peers, but are instead more likely to be mistaken as older, to be perceived as guilty and face police violence if accused of a crime, with up to 4.5 years added on top of their actual ages. Yes, that is correct. There was this tremendous study that not only studied police officers, but also studied college students, and found that up to 4.5 years were added on top of a child's actual age. And so 10-year-olds were dealt with as though they were 14, 15 years old. A 15-year-old treated as though they were almost 20. 16-year-old as though they were almost 21, and on and on and on, which also impacts then the ways in which they're treated, robbed of their childhood innocence. This also happens with young Black girls. My wife wrote a chapter relating to the adultification of Black girls, who even as young girls are over-sexualized, right? Which brings with this its own levels of harm. And also are not perceived as innocent, robbed of the innocence of their childhood. We also have to deal with overrepresentation. I had a call today from a reporter that wanted to talk about overrepresentation in a particular justice area. Black, brown, and indigenous bodies are overrepresented in every death-dealing reality in America, from mass incarceration and poverty to police brutality and COVID-19. I'll give you an example, which is among the worst in the country, actually is the worst in the country. I had opportunity to attend, I was invited to attend a conference at the Gates Center in Seattle, Washington. It was the first ever conference on race, equity, and homelessness. Black people in America make up about 13% of our nation's population, 40 million Black Americans. You pretty much split that in half to get to Black women and Black men, about 20% each. I should say Black women and girls, Black men and Black boys. Split that in half again for Black men and Black boys, about 10 million Black men over the age of 18, 10 million that are under. And in terms of representation across the nation, even though Black people make up just 13% of our nation's population, they make up nearly 39%, nearly 40%. They make up 39% of the homeless in our country, about the same amount in terms of those who are incarcerated. But right here in the city of Dallas, talk about overrepresentation. Black people make up just over 20% of those within our city, but make up nearly 70%, 69% of all who are homeless. So in just about every death-dealing reality, from COVID-19 to police brutality, where 1 out of 1,000 Black men and boys will be killed by a police officer, where so many Black men between the ages of 25 and 29 are killed in a police encounter that it is the 7th leading cause of death for that age group in America. We've got to deal with the fact that there's something going on in our country that overrepresents Black, brown, and indigenous bodies in terms of their experience of death-dealing realities. So what do we do? How do we prepare our young people for all that they will face, all that they are witnessing now, all that they are observing in the world? Well, communication is key. We know that the children of parents who experience higher levels of discrimination and those who communicated about discrimination were more prepared when confronted with discrimination. I'll say it again, the children of parents who experience higher levels of discrimination and those who communicated about discrimination were more prepared when confronted with discrimination. I think that extends beyond parents, again, to the family of trusted adults who are called to prepare our young people for the world in which they will face. And when we have open communication and dialogue with young people about these various realities, we prepare them all the more, not only for what to do when they are confronted, but we actually empower them, as I pray Jeremiah was empowered in this book, to be able to work alongside with others and grow up to become a part of those who will work to create a better day. So I want to now shift to what inspired this book, what impacted our family and gave rise to For Beautiful Black Boys. And it was the death of the young man that you see at the top, a young man by the name of Jordan Edwards. Jordan Edwards was murdered by a police officer on April 29, 2017 in Balch Springs, which is a suburb just outside of Dallas, Texas. He was 15 years old. The officer retrieved his rifle and shot indiscriminately into a vehicle that was moving away from him. They posed him no harm. Jordan Edwards had gone to a party, begged his parents to allow him to go to a party, was at a house party with his friends, his peers. Someone not associated with the party in a nursing home parking lot blocks away from where the party was held, shot several rounds into the air. When the young people heard the rounds being shot in the air, Jordan Edwards did what you would hope any young person would do. He said, you know what, it's time to go home. So he and his brothers and cousins left the party, got in their vehicle, preparing to drive off. And the video shows that as Roy Oliver arrived and saw the car moving away, he retrieved his gun and shot into the vehicle, killing young Jordan Edwards. I was asked, as is mentioned in the book, to speak at a vigil in his honor. And to be honest with you, I've done that quite a bit over the last several years for more persons than you can imagine who have been failed to racial violence and police violence. And I've been in contact and conversation and connected with so many mothers and fathers and family members of those we've lost. So I want to share with you some of my brief words offered during that vigil.
has cried out, our souls have cried out to God, how long must we deal with the stain of police brutality? The name Jordan has rung out. Our hearts have been broken over and over again. And oftentimes, although after the fact, we've desired to protect that young soul. So our souls have sung aloud, get away, Jordan. Get away from that party. Get away, Jordan. Drive swifter. Get away, Jordan. Get away from Oliver's gun. Yet Jordan is no more. But he did get away. Away from the evils of this world. Away from the racism that passes down from generation to generation as America's greatest inheritance. Away from evil itself.
I will never forget, as our congregation hosted the very first public witness after Jordan Edwards' death, had a citywide vigil as well as organizing campaign, had national leaders from the NAACP and others from across the country who are a part of that. And then also when we went to the Crowley Courthouse, our county courthouse, for that first press conference. And I was one of 3 persons on the elevator going to the top floor with Jordan Edwards' mother, father, as well as their attorney. And I'll never forget that when the threshold opened to that elevator, Mrs. Edwards grabbed the back of the elevator and began sinking to her knees and began moaning, "I can't do this." And how we had to come on side of her, lift her up, hold her up, and walk out as we made demands for justice for her son. What a heavy memory that is. And it's these memories that I carried with me in conversations that then followed with Jeremiah that created this book. Let's talk about how we have these conversations. I believe we have to establish the CARE model, preparing our children to discern and confront racial discrimination. That's actually a picture of myself and of my son that night at the vigil that was run by the Associated Press. So when we talk about CARE, first we begin with C, which is conversation. We must have intentional and honest conversations with our children about what they see and what they experience. Again, we must have intentional and honest conversations about what they see and experience. It's too late to begin these conversations just because we've borne witness to the latest tragedy. We must have these conversations early and often, because believe it or not, young people are perceptive of our world, and they are seeing and experiencing some things very early on that don't quite make any sense. And I think it's our role as caregivers, as parents, as educators, to help guide them in a way that will provide them with greater understanding concerning the world that is around them and the challenges and opportunities that the world presents. So C again, to have intentional and honest conversations with your children about what they see and experience. The next is action, to allow your children to participate in movement. I'm an advocate of young people being involved in movement because frankly, they always have. The Birmingham struggle of 1963 would not have been won without the participation of young people, even in the Children's March. I think there is space and opportunity to take young people to rallies, demonstrations, and marches. I think it's very important to allow them to come with you when you vote. I think it's important that they have firsthand observation of what it actually takes to change the world. There are persons who have made great sacrifices for us to arrive at the place where we are now, and there's still other sacrifices and work that must be accomplished. And to the extent that we can prepare our young people by having these honest conversations with them, as well as taking them with us and exposing them to these actions. And I'll share with you, I know of a young mother recently, recent protests that have happened this summer. And obviously COVID was a concern, but she wanted her young people to bear witness to what happened. And so they drove their car to the point in which the march was happening. They stood off to the side. They were not a part of the march. They had their masks on, and they had a conversation about what they were seeing and what was taking place. I think that's something that those young people will carry with them for the rest of their lives. It may inform their future work. So we must have conversation. We must engage in action, right? Teaching through allowing them to be present where action is moving forward. Also reading, obviously reading is fundamental, but reading together books that speak not only of struggle, but of those who have and who continue to courageously resist. So I think as you talk about the stories of persons both past and in a contemporary fashion who have faced great odds and yet overcome those odds through the help of God and through their trust and belief in community, I think you also help to shape the mental sky of young people. That as they read, they are transported back in time. They are provided with information, and not just to give them books, but to read with them, and then to have dialogue about what is read. I think that is essential, particularly to creating young people who are anti-racist. And then expose. I think it's important to also take your children to historic sites and museums to discuss the work and or tragedies that took place there. Allow them to touch history for themselves. So just to let you know, I have another book coming out. I never thought I would be a children's book author, but clearly God had that for me. And I have another book coming out in September of next year entitled Liberty's Civil Rights Road Trip, which is also based on a true story of allowing my family to travel with me as I led another group of faith leaders throughout the Deep South to cities and sites significant to the civil rights movement. In 2004, I founded the SMU Civil Rights Pilgrimage, which continues to this day to allow persons to travel to Glendora and to Jackson and to Selma and to Memphis and many other places in between, Birmingham, Montgomery, Atlanta, to see firsthand sites significant in the civil rights movement, as well as to speak with those who engage in the movement. We've, during my leadership, have had the opportunity to introduce the persons who participated in the pilgrimages that I've led to everyone from the dear Andrew Young, the dear C.T. Vivian, who we just lost, Ambassador Andrew Young, C.T. Vivian Jesse Jackson, as well as lesser known figures of the civil rights movement from Amelia Boynton Robinson in Selma, who was responsible for bringing Dr. King to Selma, to Vera Harris, who she and her husband housed the Freedom Riders during 1961 and were neighbors to the King family. I can't tell you the impact of taking young people to see and experience these places for themselves. And even if you can't travel across the country, there are museums and other opportunities. There are documentaries online. There are so many resources that are available at your hands that can really expose young people to the places where great sacrifices have been made to create the world that we have today. And it makes it more real to them when they have a chance to, if you will, put their hands on it, see it and know it there. So I'm going to stop right there at this point in time. I see that our time has moved on, but I'm happy to engage any questions or comments that you might have tonight. Again, we can extend the conversation on my website, which is michaelwwaters.com. But let's talk. Happy to talk about the book itself. Happy to talk about the presentation. Happy to engage with you now. Thank you very much.
I'm trying to figure out how to type in the Q&A. I don't know if it'll let me. There's a chat. Let me see. Oh, there she is. Maybe we'll go to the chat part.
Yes, I see the very first question, one that has come up, asking the ways in which this book can be used in the classroom at church. I'm happy to ask that question because it's happening now. There have been school districts who have purchased. Matter of fact, I'm doing a conversation for superintendent in his schools next week, next Friday, in fact. That have purchased copies of the book for their faculty and students and will be using it in the classroom as a means of, again, having the conversation. And so the book is, the narrative of the book is to provide an introduction, right? To help young people to think through and feel some of the things that they've already been wrestling with through the eyes of young Jeremiah. And then again, there are suggestions about how to set a safe space for the conversation. There are suggestions that speak directly to the book itself, questions, I should say, that deal directly with the book itself so you can expand your conversation based on what was just read. And there are other suggestions. For instance, in terms of speaking about race in the classroom, one of the suggestions says, ask students to tell you what they know about the history of race and racism in the United States. Often students are taught a narrative that characterizes racism as in the past, with a few racist individuals as the exception. Similarly, justice and equity are often taught as the inevitable trajectory of our country, downplaying the importance of continued racial justice work and activism, right? So there are a variety of other references here. Honor those, here's for instance an activity, honor those mentioned in this book by researching their biographies. Be ready to tell their story. So an opportunity to go even deeper into some of the persons that were mentioned in the book. So many others that I can continue, but it's all here. And I think whether you're in the classroom or whether you're at church, this is an opportunity to really begin that conversation and go deeper with it. What I often hear from trusted adults is, where do we begin? What will be helpful? How do we start? Well, I think you begin with the book. You begin with the story of a young man based on his real life experience, wrestling with the things around them, coming to the conclusion that change can happen, and then utilize the resources that are referenced here in the book and online to aid you in that process. I would suggest that this is something that you can actually do over time. You don't necessarily have to accomplish all in one moment, but think about what it would feel like to have several weeks dedicated to having a conversation with young people about race, racism, and gun violence in our nation. What would it be to have them engage in a project together that would help contribute to the better world that we now seek? So I think there are a variety of ways in which it can be engaged or prove helpful, right? Where you can get the book? Yes, as they say, you can find the book anywhere books are sold. Obviously, you can go to Flyaway Books, which is a part of Westminster John Knox, but you'll also find it on Amazon. You'll find it Barnes and Nobles. I will say that if you have the opportunity, I would welcome you to consider purchasing copies at your local Black bookstore. I would recommend that to you as yet another opportunity to support local Black businesses, as well as this book, as you engage it with your young people. The suggested age is 6 to 10. I will tell you, in previous readings, there have been persons both younger than 6 and older than 10 that have been impacted by the book and by the words that have been shared. And again, that's been a great honor for those particularly who had a chance to do a pre-reading. A number of persons, even adults, have said that the reading itself left them with tears in their eyes. But I think it's a book that can be engaged and enjoyed by persons of a variety of ages, but the recommended age from Flyaway Books is 6 to 10. And I'm suggesting that you read it to everybody, okay? The book is entitled For Beautiful Black Boys Who Believe in a Better World. And let me speak to my inspiration behind that. I also teach a national class on race in America called Makes Me Want to Holler, with corporations and churches of all sizes, a deep dive into the racial history of our nation. And what we know is that there is a certain characterization of Black masculinity that has been harmed and made harmful. It's very rare that Black young boys or even Black men are viewed as beautiful inherently, as a gift to the world. And there are all kinds of studies that I can go into in terms of how Black men and boys are perceived, even beyond what I just mentioned in terms of the increase of age that is assigned to young Black boys. And so I wanted a title that in and of itself would affirm young Black people. I mean, it's kind of hard not to feel like you have value and worth when you hear for beautiful Black boys who believe in a better world. But this book is intended for all people, all children, regardless of their race or background. I think that all children, white children, Black children, Latino children, Asian American children, I think all children can benefit greatly from this book and from the themes that are here towards building a better world. Any other questions?
Oh, let's see. Not seeing any now. Let's see.
All right. Well, that either says I've done a good job or I've not done as well as I hoped.
Can go either way.
Really can.
Let me see here. Hold on a second. Okay. Still
Any
haven't quite.
questions about the book? Any questions about the presentation? Any questions about this time that we find ourselves in our nation's history? Happy to engage and answer your questions if you have any. If not, I'm happy to turn it back over to our hosts. Let's see, is this another question that's come?
Oh, she's asking us if we're recording this webinar, if they can access it later. Jamie has the answer to that question, I think.
I'm going to speak with Carrie and Michael after this to see what their thoughts on that are. And then we will let you know, Norma. Thank you.
Okay, I see another question that's come up. It says, how would you describe your jump to writing children's books? I love that you have. You know what? It's really by inspiration. My wife and I we were on a flight to Los Angeles. We were speaking at the Los Angeles Endowment Center for a group. And we were on the plane. And while we were seated there, that conversation with Jeremiah, it's a real conversation. Let me mention that to you. That really did happen. We got home after the vigil, and my wife and I had retired for the evening. And our young man comes and stands in the doorway, and it's very clear he had something heavy on his heart. And he began to speak about all these things he was tired of, the pain, suffering in the world. And so we had to immediately engage in that dialogue. And that was still with me a few days later as we were boarding that flight, a few weeks later, I think, as we were boarding that flight. And before I knew it, I had pen to paper, and before I knew it, there was something there. And I shared with my wife, I said, I think there's something here. So again, nowhere in my imagination was children's books a part of the game plan. And I will say that children's books are not as easy, if you will, as others might think. I mean, there's it's a different approach to writing, different approach to your audience and what you hope to accomplish in that engagement. But it's something that I found very rich and rewarding that frankly, I think has impacted the ways in which I'm able to tell stories and share in other spaces. So that's the jump. It just happened. And before I knew it, then other books have come. And actually, we have another book that we'll soon be announcing, children's book that will be contracted as well, that I think helps tell stories. And our books are intended to tell stories that aren't as frequently told. What I've learned since beginning this journey is that less than 10% of all books written, children's books written each year, have a Black protagonist. And not all of them are celebratory of Black life. And so there's a definite opportunity to contribute more to this. And I'm hoping we're contributing in a powerful way. Do I have any other webinars planned? Well, I will tell you this. Thank you for that question. I'm being invited to share with different groups as they learn about the book. I've shared with congregations, with schools. I'm speaking to a class at Vanderbilt upcoming. Just a variety of different groups that are interested in having this conversation. So if you have interest, feel free to reach out either to the publisher or to myself directly at michaelwwaters.com. But yes, there are several that are lined up with groups across the country. And I'm looking forward to those engagements. Do you have other favorite children, teens book that you would recommend? If you're to purchase books for the local, you know what? I have to be honest with you. I am still exploring the world of children's books. I mean, I remember the books that we read. Goodnight Moon was a favorite one. What the Wild Things Are is a favorite one. But particularly in relationship to this subject matter, frankly, I'm becoming more engaged with those texts and the variety of ones that are present. We have a number of books here that we've picked up, particularly along our civil rights pilgrimages. There's a book called Rosa that we've enjoyed that introduces young people to the great Rosa Parks. There's a book called The Undefeated. There are a number of books that are available now. Dr. Kendi and I have done some tweeting back and forth together, and he has a book called Anti-Racist Baby that is for even younger demographic as a way of introducing them to those books. Interestingly enough, my teenager, Jeremiah is now a teenager, is in a point now where he's been very interested in reading, to my honor, his dad's books, but also books that are autobiographical or biographies, really diving into history. And so I will say to that regard for teenagers, sometimes we may limit their readings to what we consider to be YA books. But there are other books that even teenagers might be interested in reading, Dr. King, Frederick Douglass, others that can prove helpful towards their discernment of these times as well. Thank you for your question. What historic sites and museums to aid exposure to these issues do you recommend, especially in the Dallas area? Well, listen, Dallas is filled with sites of significant importance. And maybe sites that you've been to that you may or may not have recognized were important to this history. For instance, let me speak to the State Fair of Texas, which is the largest state fair in America. How many of you know that the State Fair of Texas to this day boasts the largest single day induction of the Ku Klux Klan in American history? Not everyone knows that. At one point in the city of Dallas, 1 out of every 3 eligible men in Dallas was a member of the Ku Klux Klan. That there were all type of bombings in South Dallas, and some of those homes are here, as well as those who struggled for freedom, like the Juanita Craft House, that wonderful woman who headed the NAACP Youth League, who was also responsible for working to desegregate the State Fair of Texas and went on to become first Black elected official to the city council in the city of Dallas. There's also at the corner of Main and Eckerd downtown, which was the site of the lynching of Allen Brooks on March the 3rd, 1910, one of the more troubling lynching events in American history, happened right here in downtown Dallas. I can go on. Many people are aware, obviously, of the Kennedy assassination historic sites, but there are a number of significant sites related to Black history all across the city, including South Dallas as well. Any other questions? Make sure I'm not missing any. There is the African American Museum. Please allow me to mention that. It's also at the State Fair of Texas on the fairgrounds. I also think that the recent Holocaust Museum is worth your time and energy as well.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Michael. This has been absolutely incredible. And I know that it's been great for all of our the people who've joined us as well. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to everybody here as well for coming. I'm excited to buy the book. I'm gonna hop on Flyaway Books after we get off here, and maybe buy a couple for some other people I know too. So thank you.
Well, I'd
again.
appreciate that, and that has been our joy as well. Again, thank you for this opportunity to share with you, and let me offer my prayers for all of you as you continue to uplift and engage our young people. I don't know that there's anything greater, any gift greater that is given to us, an opportunity to empower and uplift young people. But I will tell you one of the more humbling aspects of this. And let me pause right quick. Also, a portion of these proceeds from the sale of the book, I should say this, go to support the Botham Jean Foundation. Botham Jean, as many of you know, was killed here in the city of Dallas. And this is to support the work of the foundation, the ongoing fight for justice in our nation, as well as Moms of Black Boys United, which is also a national organization that seeks to uplift young Black men and be a part of the needed change happening in our country. But what I wanted to say is that one of the joys has been, just as you mentioned, Jamie, there have been persons who have purchased multiple copies and they've said, you know what, I have 5 beautiful Black boys in my life that I need to give the book to. And believe it or not, they're not all Black families. The amazing thing is there's been a number of white allies and others who said, you know what, I'm buying a copy of this book for all of my dear Black friends because I want to affirm and uplift and celebrate the young people in their lives. And so thank you so much again for your support. And if you'd like to connect, again, I can be reached at michaelwwaters.com. Thank you for a delightful evening.
Thank you, Michael. We appreciate it.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night.